Simi and I will be right back. Don't ask any questions. It'll be for 1 minute.
It sparks flashes of brilliance, prompts bold moves, and threads our wildest ideas together. So what exactly is the student spirit? Well, it's the part of us that's forever curious, a mindset where anything is possible. Tries new things. Keeps you sharp between the ears and pays just a little more attention. It isn't afraid to make a statement. Changes the world, one step at a time. And squeezes our egos, insecurities, and fears into tiny little metaphorical balls before crushing them. The curious don't just think, they do. Stay curious.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering the virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by the Student Hotel Vienna and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone and/or go to the Facebook Live video feed, the link to which has been placed in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. Tonight, our featured guest is Alexander Sandy Walsh Wilson, cellist of the Alexander String Quartet, and he joins us from San Francisco, California. We are also joined from Oakland, California by our team's expert commentator, Dr. Bob. And live in studio at the Student Hotel Vienna, we welcome again Niels Moos, professor of opera at the Music and Arts University of the city of Vienna. Adam Smith, a Scottish contemporary of Joseph Haydn, is widely considered to be the father of classical economics. Smith's so-called invisible hand works focus on what's good for you, and I focus on what's good for me. Because you focus on your interest and I focus on mine, we end up unintentionally improving each other's life situations. Rather than everything we don't like by ourselves and ending up completely exhausted after having produced just one unit, we each specialize in what really interests us and end up producing 1.5 units, 0.5 of which we trade with each other before using our leftover time and energy to go out for ice cream. Not far south of the small Scottish town that Adam Smith grew up in, at least by American standards, is the Northumbrian town of Blyth. There, shortly after World War II, two school teachers who first met playing tennis doubles started a family. The Wilson family didn't listen to music, they made music. Mr. Wilson wouldn't allow a gramophone in the house because he wanted his children actively playing music. Sandy, his eldest son and our featured guest tonight, recalls rushing to claim a seat at the piano bench after dinner. If you weren't serenading the family post-repast, you were washing the dishes. Reminiscent of the anecdote of Wagner invisibly seated at the head of the stairs while he listened to Franz Liszt's late-night Beethoven performance, the Wilson kids would bask in their parents' Sunday night duets from a similar perch. It seems that Adam Smith's division of labor was an integral part of Wilson family life, and that Sandy would happily apply its principles every step of his career. As a proud and engaged resident of a communal-style dormitory for students in Copenhagen, as principal cellist of the Allgemeine Musikgesellschaft Orchestra in Lucerne, Switzerland, and as cellist and co-founding member of the Alexander String Quartet, the 40th anniversary of which is to be celebrated next year. Sandy, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Simeon. It's a pleasure to be here. Cut
So,
that little tune.
okay,
All right. It's 10 o'clock in the morning here, and I haven't practiced much yet.
lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So, Sandy, tell us a little bit about this amazing family of yours. Everybody was singing together in the car and playing music together. That's how it went every day, I imagine. Only happiness.
Pretty much. Pretty much. We had a big old Bedford utilibrake, and we could fit all 6 kids and my parents in there, and occasionally my grandparents too. But I can't remember ever going anywhere when my father, from the driver's seat, would be essentially inspiring us to sing rounds or whatever. But if we weren't out there doing a geographical survey of my home county of Northumberland, because he was a geographer, and we were 6 kids on 2 school teacher salaries, so we didn't have any exotic vacations. We just piled in the van and we'd go up to Druridge Bay and swim all day, or we'd drive around the county looking at all of the Romanesque ruins and landmarks, and it was a fun time, but we sang all the way.
Amazing. I love it. So tell me, how is it that you got into cello? How is it, did your family, did they each play a stringed instrument?
Well, I'm the second of 6 kids, 3 boys and 3 girls. And certainly when my eldest sister wanted to begin piano lessons, she was 9, and but she didn't want to go alone. So my parents persuaded our teacher, Mrs. Hornsby was her name, to teach me too. She'd never taught a 6-year-old before, but she said she would do it. So that began the tradition that all of my siblings would have piano lessons. That was the first instrument that we began to study. And in fact, there was a period of time when I think we would basically occupy the entire Wednesday evening lineup of students for Mrs. Hornsby. And we would go one after the other in sequence and have our piano lessons. But then at some point, I think a year or so later, my sister began to have violin lessons. And my parents asked me in due course if I would like to have violin lessons too. And I said, hell no, I want to play the cello. They were sort of racking their brains thinking, well, what do you know about cellos, you know? And of course, my father had forgotten that he had taken me to one of the grammar school, high school orchestral evenings, plays, orchestras, sort of a hootenanny, we would call it now. And I remember seeing a young, I would say, she seemed old to me. I was 7.5 or 8 or something. But she was in high school and she played the Forêt Sicilienne. I remember it vividly. And she probably did a really beautiful job, but to me, I loved the physicality of it, the way she was playing it, but I knew she wasn't doing it right. It's a terrible thing to admit, you know. But I just loved what it looked like, but I knew it could sound better or different, you know. So that was how I knew about a cello. And they said, okay. So they found a cello for me, and it was a full-size cello, and I was 8.5 or something, so I was pint-sized. And so I started playing on this thing, and it was way out here, but I loved it. And in those days, the Northumberland County Council employed a great many peripatetic music instrumental teachers. And I can tell you that for 7 and 6pence a semester, 3 semesters, terms basically in the year, I could have cello lessons. That was the cost. The instrument, if I needed an instrument, I could have borrowed an instrument, but I actually was lent this instrument by a friend of my family independently. But it was a lovely cello. It was made in 1906, I recall, and it was the only cello that this ship's draftsman had actually made. He wasn't an instrument maker. He lived in my hometown of 36,000 people, and he'd made the instrument in 1906. So it was really a great way to start.
And so between the time that you started with these peripatetic teachers, and then you joined or you went to Scotland to study, tell us about this when you decided this is my thing.
Well, together again with my older sister, Dorothy, we became proficient enough that not only did we play in the local Arts Council orchestra in our hometown of Bath, but we played in the County Youth Orchestra, which was very exciting. I mean, we'd go to Gosforth every Saturday for rehearsals, and it was marvelous. So at the age of 11 or so, I was already playing some great symphonic music with the best musicians in the county. And that led subsequently to the Northern Junior Philharmonic, which met every summer. We'd meet at the University of Newcastle and played, again, even more ambitious repertoire, but with really distinguished conductors, British conductors primarily, who would come and work with us for a week, and we'd prepare these programs and play them in the City Hall in Newcastle. And then beyond that, we became members of the British Youth Symphony Orchestra already at the age of 11. And so for the next 6-7 years, we'd meet usually twice a year, Bristol, Birmingham, Leeds, wherever we'd travel and meet contemporaries. I mean, my immediate contemporary and good friend at the time, we've lost touch somewhat in the meantime, was Simon Rattle. He was a timpanist, and so many musicians in this orchestra. We'd all go back to our various places and look forward to the next time we'd get together. But the funny thing was that they didn't recognize that my sister and I were siblings, but they could hear from, and you can't hear it now, but they could hear from our Northumbrian dialect, or the Geordie that we'd speak. They thought we were both from Wales. Because the Welsh, like the Northumbrians, we always intone up at the end of a sentence, so it sounds as if we're asking a question. And they said, you guys, you talk funny. You talk the same. I said, well, that's because, we're from the same household. I said, oh, that's right. Oh.
And so was the traveling and the meeting new, interesting people as interesting or even more interesting than the music you were playing?
No, it wasn't more interesting, but it was a wonderful byproduct. I told you that my father was a geographer, and you asked how I ended up getting to Scotland. Well, I knew from an early age that music was my ticket to ride, so to speak. It was getting me out of my lovely but small hometown of Blythe. It's only, as I said, 36,000 people. It was a coal mining and a shipbuilding, ship breaking, and ultimately became famous for the power station and the aluminium smelting and so forth. But it was a small industrial town, 15 miles outside of Newcastle upon Tyne. So, in those days, in the 60s, I was born in 1955. So in the 60s, the late 60s, we were really in a very serious industrial slump. The coal mines were closing, or had closed, and the ship breaking wasn't going on anymore. There was a great deal of redundancy, unemployment, and they were dark times. So it was great at an early age to feel that I had a purpose. There was something I could do that it gave me an opportunity to set my sights a little further afield. And I'm my father's son, you know. I love traveling. The experience of seeing and other people who spoke differently, they ate different food, you know, they went to different schools, they listened to different orchestras, you know, everything was everything was stimulating to me. I just loved to travel, and I still do.
So let's bring in Professor Niels Moos. Similar experience that you had there growing up in Europe?
Yes, first of all, Sandy, you are very sympathetic to me because actually my grandmother, she was a Crawford, and it is a Crawford clan from Scotland. Yes. So in that sense, we are very close. But also we are very close because I know that you studied in Denmark. Of course, I'm Danish. And I would like to hear not only about your experience there, but also what you brought from Denmark and the Danish educational system and how Danish people are, how that has influenced your life.
Oh my God. For har det godt i deres lille Danmark, they used to say, you know. And I came to Denmark first in 1970 with the organization, the Jeunesse Musicale. And my sister and I, we ran the local, well, my sister particularly, was responsible for administering the local Jeunesse Musicale program, which provided fantastic subsidies for young people to go and listen to virtually all concerts. And so there was a big international convention in Copenhagen in 1970, and we went, and I spent some time in Odense as well as in Copenhagen. And of course, my hometown, Newcastle upon Tyne, we had the DFDS ferries that would cross
from
the North Sea to Esbjerg. From Esbjerg. So I first saw Aarhus, where I know you grew up, you know, on my way to Fyn, where we spent a week in Odense, which was the birthplace of Carl Nielsen and Jose Anderson as well. But
Christian Andersen.
Yes, I had such a wonderful experience. The hospitality and this hyggeligt kind of, which is that Danish word that you can't really translate. It's just to be cozy, I think, is perhaps the closest translation. You have a better word?
That's what the Vikings never really could teach the English. Maybe they didn't see the Vikings as that, but.
Yeah. You know, I just digress for a second to mention that in my home in Northumberland, we are known as Geordies. And a Geordie is defined by some as, you know, if you're born within smelling distance of the River Tyne, then you're probably a Geordie. And then they would argue that actually on a bad day, that could be a very large area. Yeah. But my dialect, which we often use to tell jokes and so forth, is heavily influenced by the Vikings and the Danes, perhaps in particular. They're very, very close. And so I felt this improbable bond right away at the very beginning. And of course, to go to Denmark as a 14-year-old, I mean, I was very impressionable. I loved it. But of course, I also got to hear Leinsdorf conducting the Jeunesse Musicale, l'Orchestre Mondial in Copenhagen, and just such an overwhelming experience and so much to take in one of Europe's most beautiful capitals. I think I was impressed, and again, it just reinforced my experience that music was a way to travel and to get to see the world for me. So I ended up going to Israel in 1973 as a member myself of the Orchestre Mondial, and in this case to work with Zubin Mehta. And it was unusual that in this orchestra of young people from 46 different countries, all gathering to play music in Israel and to tour Israel with Mehta, again, fabulous repertoire. I would say that at least 3 out of the 10 members of the cello section were Danish. And some of the best wind players and the flautists and so forth. Denmark was very well represented, but I was so impressed by the cellists. And when
We
it
had
came,
two big centers at that time in Denmark
yes,
for cello
absolutely.
playing. Yeah.
And so when it came time for me to graduate from the Royal Scottish Academy of Music, now the Royal Scottish Conservatoire, I had the chance to go to the Guildhall School to work with William Pleath, and I was excited by that, of course, and honored, but I was even more excited at the opportunity to go to Copenhagen and to work with Erling Blundell Bengtsson, who was the teacher of these fine cellists who so impressed me. And of course, Erling was a protege, and in fact, had spent some time as assistant to Piatigorsky at the Curtis Institute.
Of course.
But
Yeah.
he was one of Denmark's most famous musical sons.
He also taught in America.
Yes, he did. Well, of course, he was half Icelandic and half Danish, and had come to Philadelphia to go to Curtis as a very young man, I think 14 and so forth, and had lived and worked in there. Because at that time, actually, Piatigorsky had been invited to move to USC to teach there, and of course, famously he spent the rest of his life essentially based in LA. And Erling continued as a 17-year-old, I think, to teach at Curtis at that young age. And he came back to Denmark as a 22-year-old to assume a full professorship at DKDM, the Royal Danish Conservatory in Copenhagen. So he was a phenomenal fellow. And of course, my only link, sad to say, to Piatigorsky. I never actually got to meet or work with Piatigorsky. I did, in fact, have a place to study with him in Zurich in 1977, where he was giving master classes, but sadly he died just 1 month before that. So I never got to meet him.
Okay.
But interestingly, again, I told this to Simeon when we were chatting earlier, that I was enormously fortunate, even though, as I said, Blythe was a small town on the outskirts of Newcastle. Newcastle was a fantastic hub of really progressive music making. And during my very young adolescence, I got to hear almost all of the greatest cellists of the day live, and in some cases many times. But finding my way to Copenhagen, it was a curious set of circumstances, but I consider it almost my second home. I was embraced and loved my time there.
Sandy, so before we bring in Dr. Bob, I wanted to ask you about your cellos. So that they're by Francis Kuttner. They're in San Francisco. And that you have two of them actually from the same family.
I have two right here, and the one that I played on at the beginning there. This is a fabulous instrument. It's a Stradivarius copy, and it was made in 1987. And the extraordinary thing about this instrument, I don't own this instrument. It's on loan to me, as are the three matching instruments from this matched set of this quartet of instruments. They're known as the Ellen M. Egger, E-G-G-E-R, Egger Quartet. And they're all Strad copies, and they're made from the same wood, from the same tree, and they are gorgeous together. The extraordinary thing about them is that Francis, the luthier who made them, spends half of the year every year in Cremona, Italy, of course, some would say the birthplace of violin making. And the other half of the year he spends here in San Francisco. So for now, let's see, going on 35 years, these instruments have been curated by Francis, the luthier. So he gets to take care of the instruments and to do the maintenance. He sees them every year, sometimes more frequently, and he's able to do any maintenance and updating or upgrading or just fine-tuning of these instruments. So that's an unusual thing, I think, for a maker to be able to revisit instruments that he's made multiple times over more than 3 decades. And the other instrument I have here is one that I own. and this is another instrument also by Francis. Slightly different model. It's a little more refined. And interesting, it's actually made from, this is African hardwood here. It's a one-piece back, and it's Tanzanian wood, and otherwise all of the wood I think in these instruments from Bosnia. But it's a gorgeous instrument made in 1980, and this was the instrument that won the grand prize in the Violin Society of America's international competition at the time. I'm very, very pleased to have this. And it has a little nickname. It's called the Cannon, which has something to do with how loud it is.
And Sam, would we as cello lay people be able to hear the difference between the two cellos?
Not really, and certainly not, I think, under these circumstances. Under ideal circumstances, I might be able to demonstrate some areas in which the instrument, the tenor or the timbre is a little different. But there is something remarkable about this cello that I love playing in the quartet, with the quartet, is that it particularly complements the viola. Okay. So the two instruments side by side have a very very sweet sounding relationship.
And
yeah, it is early. I did mention that, didn't it? It's early. Mellifluous is what I meant to say.
Understand. And, does one of the cellos do things that you like that the other cello doesn't, or do they both have their own qualities? Can we hear a little bit?
Yeah. Let me see. This is the quartet cello. Now, that's the opening, by the way, of the first of the Razumovsky quartets. And here's the same passage on this cello. So maybe you can hear, but this is a more robust, round, and more sort of a baritone kind of a sound. This is a more tenor register, and so this would be lovely if that was a cello sonata with piano. But playing together in the quartet, where you are essentially complementing and mixing with like instruments, this can be less obtrusive. You can hear it perfectly well in the mix, but it's not going to compete with the viola, for example, which can be very close in register. They will be very much more complementary, whereas this might tend to predominate and maybe obstruct the viola line a little bit. So it's all about this the way in which they blend.
And you said which one is the canon?
Oh, that's my own cello, the older one, the second one, which is a more robust sort of baritone sounding instrument.
So if you're angry at the violist, then you just bring.
What do you mean if? What's that?
Dr. Bob, I didn't think you were going to go after the violists like that. I understood that you were like Switzerland, but okay. So.
Oh my God.
We go after them because we can.
So I wanted to ask you about, now that we have you, about what Sandy and Niels were talking about, how music brought them all over the place. As you probably know, there's a large ocean that separates the United States from Europe, and that you grew up on the western side of that ocean. And so it wasn't as easy for you to get around. But what do you think about that today? All three of you here are university professors, and I know that in Europe they have this Erasmus program, that it's one of the most successful political programs that the European Union has, in which university students can freely go from one country to one university to another in a different country. In the United States, I know those kind of transfers aren't as common. What do you think about this whole situation, Bob, about music taking you places?
First of all, I wouldn't call the Atlantic an ocean. I would call it a moat. We are on the outside. Europe is on the inside. So to be able to get to Europe is everybody's dream. You know, without getting, there's enough U.S. bashing going on right now. I shouldn't indulge in it any more than is necessary. But frankly, the arts have never been particularly intrinsic to American culture. This is the land of the mercantile. This is the land where you're worth as much as you can make. And the arts have never made money. They're not supposed to make money. They're supposed to crystallize and distill reality in a way that transcends that reality. That's never been important to the people who made this country. And to a degree to this day, we'll never see the sort of funding for young musicians, for example, that Sandy described. I would also distinguish, because I think this is important for our listeners who might not even be aware of this, who see musicians as musicians. You know, piano players are piano players and singers are singers, violin players, cellists, they're all the same, but they're not. Sandy's experience, I was once married to a wonderful flute player. Her experience was the same as Sandy's, and this was a world I didn't know anything about until I married her. And that world is the world of student orchestras, of ever getting better and joining better student orchestras than of master classes at 15 and 16, of meeting people in these orchestras that become lifelong friends and lifelong acquaintances, to having people all over the world that she could call on, that Sandy can call on. If you're a piano player, you're by yourself in a room, hopefully with a decent piano, but perhaps not. You never have those kind of social experiences. You just don't. There's no apparatus for it. The piano, by its nature, is sadly a singular instrument. It's its own orchestra. Same if you're a composer. You sit by yourself, and then hat in hand, you beg these wonderful players to, please, sir, play my music, please. Singers usually don't come into their voices until they're puberty or post-puberty. As a professor at the San Francisco Conservatory, I would tell you that many of our singers had wonderful voices, but knew nothing about music because they didn't even decide to go into music until they were 16 or 17 years old. That's another different animal entirely. So what Sandy is describing is a whole subculture that's out there, like the marching band subculture, a world unto itself that unless you're a part of, you have no idea that it exists. And I am envious, Sandy. You can't see it, but I'm green inside for the kind of experiences, the formative experiences you had, and those collegial relationships you'll always have.
May I say something? It's very funny you mentioned this Jeunesse Musicale World Orchestra you played in. I actually was a pianist. I played the obbligato piano part. I think it was 1980 in Prokofiev piece. So wow. There we also have the same experiences. And I'm very happy that today Jeunesse Musicale, the president of Jeunesse Musicale, is a very, very nice lady from Denmark who has lived many years in Paris, who is called Jessie Westenholz, and she's trying to do a lot of things also in the whole world.
That makes me very happy, Niels.
No,
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would like now for us to move on to Sandy's principal work that he's spent 39 years developing. Let's take a look at this video.
What's the definition of a string quartet? And it's like, well, it's comprised of one.
Let's have way too much fun in your life. Now, that video right there in Poland, the Alexander String Quartet's tour of Poland, it embodies everything that we've been talking to up to now. Four colleagues who are also friends, who are also teammates, traveling the world. Like you said, music is your ticket to ride. Tell us about the Alexander String Quartet.
Well, you know, I have to say that just seeing that little clip or that little montage there from that trip, and by the way, you saw briefly Francis in there as well. Francis happened to be in Italy at the time that we were there, and he came to Warsaw to hear his quartet of instruments played in Wall Castle, a very special occasion. But one of the wonderful things I've already spoken about, the privilege of being able to travel freely, which of course we can't currently. It's something which I've always appreciated from an early age, and I've indulged in it as much as I can. But in my life as a musician, Certainly there can be some grim opportunities. I can remember being very ill on a couple of occasions, once in Amsterdam, and you know, to be far away from home, but never to be alone. You know, you've got 3 colleagues who are close by, who are going to take care of you, or who you can take care of. Or conversely, when you're far away from home and something goes really badly wrong at home, and you know, we have a network of what we refer to as the quartet widows, who reach out and take care of each other too, and of each other's children. And by the way, in that context, I have to include Bob and his wonderful wife Nancy and their children too. You know, musicians, we need community, and now Niels can speak to this too. It's a necessary part of our work, that we have to travel. And a few presenters really understand that as well. And when they express their gratitude to us for the effort and strain and stress that we put into doing this, they also recognize that we couldn't do this without our families and our families' support. And it's they who are making the sacrifices too, in order to be able, for us to be able to do this work. We don't do it because it makes us very rich. Some of us do better than others, but we are all richly fulfilled in doing this work. But the sacrifice is the sacrifice that our families make in order to be able to share us. And the same is true, you know, with Joyce Yang, who I know you spoke to just a week ago, and a wonderful colleague and collaborator of ours. I made the joke to Simeon that this little studio that I have here in my apartment here on Nob Hill in San Francisco, I refer to it sometimes. This is Joyce's bedroom. This is actually her bed. But it's also the bed of Ellie Iban, you know, who was here recently recording with us too. And this is the chair that Bob's son sits in on New Year's Day, sitting at my computer whilst we're all making martinis out there. And you know, we have an enormous support network. That it's a small world, is what I'm trying to say.
Niels?
Yeah, I think also it's very important to emphasize that it's a very rare thing nowadays that you have played together for 30 years.
Yes.
It is what we have forgotten also in classical music. We want news, we want events, but we don't realize, or we have forgotten that classical music is like a good bottle of red wine that matures over the years. Yeah.
That's beautifully stated, you know, and the truth of the matter is that we founded the quartet in 1981, and this year marks, let me see, 18 years, almost 2 decades, in which the membership of the quartet has been consistent. It's the longest spell in 39 years when there has been no change in membership. And it's one of those things that I haven't, you know, I'm a little bit bittersweet here. My colleague Paul, who founded the quartet with me, is retiring right now. And I'm so happy for him. It's been almost 40 years of just a fabulous collaboration. You know, we have fought like brothers fight, you know, because we care about what we do. We care about the music. We care about all sorts of things that have to do with this. Sometimes we call it, it's like a bad marriage between 4 people with no sex. You know, it's just, it's
and no one cooks.
but you know, it's the nature of the beast. This is what we have to do to make it work. Well, Paul is retiring, and his successor is a fabulous Canadian violist. His name is David Samuel, and we have known David for almost 20 years. In fact, he and his wife worked with the quartet in almost 2 decades ago with their quartet at the time, the Fiara Quartet, a wonderful group. And we're at this stage right now where we're trying to get David here from New Zealand to work with us. But of course, in these times of COVID, things don't move that easily. But it's coming together, and it's going to be fine. But some people worry, we worried, I know, the first time we changed a member in our quartet. We were only 2 years old, and it was taboo at the time. It was something you didn't do. Everyone looked and revered, the Guarneri Quartet and the Juilliard and so forth. These were the groups that played together for so long, or the Amadeus, of course, or the great European quartets, all of which had an enormous influence on us. But at the same time, we began to realize that actually changing a member changes everything. It's not like a new person comes into the quartet and they have to go with the consensus because the three other guys or women or whatever, they know how to do this and you just have to fit in. But we learned quickly that wasn't the way it worked. Everybody had to assimilate completely. And when you bring a new member in, it tests the relationship between everybody in the quartet because you all have to form a new relationship, not just with the new person, but with each other. And the sooner you embrace that and actually run with it, you realize what a fantastic superpower.
It's a wonderful thing. Yeah.
It's a fantastic thing. And I can tell you that, 39 years in, I'm as sad as I am to bid Paul goodbye, I'm thrilled to welcome David because I know that everything is going to change and it's going to be better. It's something
that's how we keep young.
Yes.
Hopefully, if it doesn't kill us first. I've known the quartet since 1986. The composers group that I was part of had a composition competition. These guys played a piece called Bucephalus by Martin Bresnik. It won our competition. We couldn't find anyone who could possibly play the piece as well as the Alexander played it on the recording we had. So we figured out a way to bring them out from New York to perform in San Francisco. And that was in 86. And they just knocked our socks off. And I'm telling you this story because I want to take, at least our group needs to take a little credit for bringing the Alexander to San Francisco, because ultimately 3 years later, they settled in the city. And that's when I would have met what was one of the earliest permutations of the group. And I've seen every permutation since. And I've written for every permutation we didn't mention, but I've composed 3 string quartets and a piano quintet for the Alexander, going back to 1988. And so I and one of those pieces called Among Friends, which is from 95, which was for the permutation that existed then, was about the group itself. I mean, the friends were the members of the quartet, and I tried to portray the roles that they play as individuals within the piece. And what Sandy says is fascinating and absolutely accurate. The new member does not just fit in. The new member changes the entire tone of the sound, of the way they play. I'm really looking forward to seeing how David Samuel fits in, because Paul Yarbrough, who's been the founding violist, is superb. And talk about cannons. I mean, Paul plays that instrument as if it was a cello. And he's just brilliant, and he's going to be, he can't be replaced. So something else is going to happen. A new dynamic is going to evolve. And I, for one, am very much looking forward to seeing it. And Sandy, aside from your wives, I don't think there's anyone out there other than me who has listened to you more, who's shared the stage. Well, listen, we're on stage together, usually 10, 12 times a year?
Yes.
I mean, and I stand next to Sandy when I do my presentations. I'll tell you that whatever he's playing is a freaking canon. I mean, I just love standing next to Sandy and listening to the quartet. I don't think there's anyone out there that knows your sound better than I do. And I'd be really interested to hear the next permutation of the Alexander String Quartet. Now, while I'm talking, because Sandy's not going to bring this up, someone has to. The ASQ did something very wise, very important, quite a while ago. Rather than being slaves to the record industry, they founded their own record label called Foghorn Classics. Foghorn, after the Foghorns in San Francisco Bay. And they have recorded a tremendous amount of the repertoire. I just grabbed a few discs here. Their Beethoven is my go-to Beethoven set. Their Shostakovich is my go-to Shostakovich. They have also collaborated with Joyce Yang, who we met last week. Their Johannes Brahms and Robert Schumann piano quintets are the best you can buy. I kid you not. and ditto the Mozart piano quartets. You must visit the Foghorn website, and you must indulge yourselves in these times of COVID. Nothing will keep us happy, satisfied, and sane better than fine music. And these performances are uniformly superb and brilliantly recorded, I might add. We all know the principal engineer is someone named Robert Shoemaker. He's a Bay Area guy, and no one records better than Bob. So, Sandy, I don't know if you were going to bring this up, but I'm glad I did.
Well,
Foghorn.
I'm just cooling off here. I'm blushing.
let's have a look at. That's lovely. Wow. Well, let's look now at where people can peruse all of this great music, these recordings that Bob's talking about. So we have here Sandy's website, excuse me, the Alexander String Quartet's website, and I believe everybody can purchase this music right from the website with no problem. Here we go. There it is. There's the Brahms and Mozart clarinet quintets, Dvorak Lokal, and there are the Mahler song cycles that we just heard. So lovely. And I believe we can just click on that, and we will give you the website at the end of the show. But we just want to show you how many fabulous recordings they've made. And they are all available there on the website with just a click. So now I wanted to ask you, Sandy, so can you play a few examples for us? Your favorite chamber music. Show us a little bit what the cello does in chamber music.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, wow.
Well, I mean, you know, we can be the underpinning. I mean, for example, this would be the underpinning, for example, the second movement of Beethoven's third Razumovsky quartet. We're just basically the pulse, and we're out of the way, but also the foundation harmonically, you know. So then we can also imitate the violin. And then Beethoven, again, sometimes gives us the first word. So and then we keep coming back to Beethoven, partly because he was so prolific. I mean, he wrote 16 phenomenal quartets. And in fact, Bob was holding up his box set. That's 9 CDs. That's how much space it takes to document all of this music. But
if I might insert one thing there, Sandy, just where you are right now, just to stop. Beethoven apparently had a very sweet baritone speaking voice, and the cello was his alter ego as a composer. I mean, when Beethoven wants to place himself in a piece of music, more often than not, it's the cellos, and it's the baritone voice when he needs that most important statement, as opposed to, let's say, Dmitri Shostakovich, who had a tenor voice whose instrumental alter ego was the viola. When he had something particularly important to say, he says it with a viola. So Beethoven says it with the cello. So if I'm a musician, I want to be a cellist. OMG, that's where the action is, especially when we're talking about Beethoven. And so there's a reason why there's so much extraordinary cello writing in Beethoven's music. Thank you, dude.
Oh, thank you. So the cello is very chameleonic. We can get ourselves in and out of all sorts of situations, and the timbral texture, the context in which everything is presented with these simpatico instruments, that it's just a wonderful environment. I have a little line here from coming back to Beethoven again. There's and then just 2 bars later. We have, it's a lovely instrument. It'll do anything I want it to. I think if I can imagine it, I have to figure out, how to get out of the way and let the cello do it, because it's all set up to do it. But we have, since Haydn on, from the middle of the 18th century and to the 21st century, music by Bob. And the piece that you mentioned before, the work that, speaking about music being the opportunity to travel, the first time I came to San Francisco, actually the second time I came to San Francisco, was in order to come and play that Bucephalus, who many of you will know was Alexander the Great's warhorse. So a little game there that Martin Bresnik was having when he wrote that piece for us. And indeed, it's a fabulous piece that proved to be our warhorse. It opened all sorts of doors and took us not only all across the country, but to Europe as well, as did Bob's. Wow, I think we gave the premiere of your quartet, Bob, in Greece and in Amsterdam. And
Child's Play. You played it at the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. It was the greatest, I have to tell you, still. And I wish it wasn't so, but this was in 1993, in February of '93. These guys played my what was my second string quartet at the Concertgebouw, and on the marquee at the Concertgebouw was Haydn. And was it Smetana? What else did you play on that concert?
I think you're right, Smetana and
Haydn, Smetana, Greenberg, and they even spelled my name right. And I'm just standing there. We didn't have cell phones then to take pictures, but I had a camera with me. I took that marquee from every conceivable angle. It was a great moment. It was a great moment. Yeah.
So now, like Bob says, as you reflect back and you take stock and you look forward, what's the future look like to you?
Well, if I only had a crystal ball. I think that music heals. And, I think it's in times of trial and tribulation that artists in general become the most eloquent, and I think they are it's the arts in all of its forms that I think really help us to work our way through, to document what the existential dilemma is. I'm looking forward to some fantastic music coming out of this period of lockdown. I can imagine that we'll see the reaction in other art forms before we hear it in music. We know that music, even still in the 21st century, takes a little bit longer. It's less spontaneous, I should say, than, for example, the visual arts. You can paint a painting or write a poem or much more quickly and much more independently than it takes the time to compose a composition and then find the musicians to play it as well as the listeners to hear it. One doesn't even digest music as quickly and as spontaneously as one can interpret and draw inspiration from a painting. But I believe that there's going to be fantastic creativity going on in this period of self-reflection. And I think many of you are aware that we're going through a political election right here in the States at the moment. And yeah, it's bewildering. It's absolutely bewildering to us that we should find ourselves in this period of such division. And we are not divided. We're really not divided at all, but we're being led to believe that we are. And I think that there's going to be a tremendous pushback against this. And when we celebrate the other side of this, we'll have some fabulous music to show for it. And I want to be a part of that. And I want to help disseminate that and celebrate it. It's what we do. Music is what we do. And we aren't in a vacuum. We're very much influenced by where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. We don't know always where we're going, but we know it's going to be a great ride.
Wonderful. So, Sandy, let's take a look at how we can stay in touch with you. We have your website right here. There it is. Stay in touch with Alexander. So, asq4.com. There it is. There we see Sandy right there. And so we can follow up on all of your activities here, Sandy?
Yes, we'll keep it updated. It may be in need of a tweak right about now. I can see that we haven't got David's biography or his photograph in there just yet, but it'll be there very shortly. And this will lead you also through the audio link to a website for the record label, which is Stockholm Classics.
Okay. And Sandy, people can contact you directly if they want to?
Please, absolutely. And my colleagues too. Be delighted to hear from you.
There it is. We have all their emails right there under contact. So everybody feel free to write to Sandy. And he's there to answer all your questions, hear your comments, especially about violas. I get the
I put my foot in my mouth again. I'm sorry, guys. Sorry.
So, Sandy, would you be willing to play us another something?
I'd be delighted. Let me give you another movement from the Bach. You see, I don't even need the music for this. Here we go.
Lovely.
Bravo, bravo.
Thank you.
I'd just like to tell everybody next week we have Andres Garcia, engineering music. Andres will be here live in studio. And there he is, right there. He is a choir conductor and orchestra conductor. And he is going to tell us about his journey here from Medellin, Colombia, and his studies here and how he keeps it all together with his family, his 2 kids, all of the work, everything that we were talking about tonight, and how crazy it is for musicians traveling. We look forward to welcoming him next week and welcoming you, our participants, here once again on Wednesday. So thank you so much, Sandy, for welcoming us into your home, sharing your talents, your life with us. We are so grateful to become friends. And thank you very much to Dr. Bob, to Professor Niels Moos, to our superhero production team, our generous sponsors, the Student Hotel Vienna, and of course you, our participants, who make this all worthwhile. So, live from the Student Hotel Vienna, from San Francisco, California, from Oakland, California. See you next week. Goodbye.